Hi again. So the second case I want to discuss is one that I've actually already talked briefly about, and that is the Graham versus John Deere case that took place in 1965 to 66. This case was actually taken up to the Supreme Court and consolidated with two other cases involving obviousness, but the industry with those two cases was actually chemical related and did not deal with tractors. So I'm going to stick to the tractor side of the story. So the idea was that an inventor named William Graham came up with this spiffy device to help absorb shock in tractors while traveling over rocky soil. He patented this invention in 1950 and later came up with an improvement, which was also patented in 1953. Now, sometime later, John Deere came around and decided to use a device very similar to what Graham had invented, so naturally he sued John Deere for infringement. So in the trial court, they actually sided with John Deere, and naturally Graham appealed. In the appellate court, Graham won out, so John Deere appealed, and eventually this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court actually sided with John Deere, and that was the final decision. Basically, what the Supreme Court said was that Graham's add-on patent to his original invention was obvious given what we knew from his previous patent. They didn't actually feel like this improvement added anything new to the device, and therefore it was not a valid patent. Furthermore, because of Graham's previous patent, it was obvious or easy for someone who was skilled or ordinarily skilled in the art to actually come up with this improvement, and therefore Graham's patent was invalidated with his own previous patent used as prior art. Another important thing to note about this case was that it gave rise to something known as the Graham factors, which are factors to determine non-obviousness. These include the scope and content of the prior art, the differences between the claimed invention and the prior art, the level of ordinary skill in the prior art, and some secondary considerations such as the commercial success, long felt but unsolved needs, and the failure of others. So the other two cases that were mentioned before also made use of these Graham factors, and the Supreme Court basically came up with the same ruling, was that whatever chemical composition happened was actually obvious given prior art. And this was perhaps one of the most important cases in establishing how the court saw non-obviousness up until KSR versus Teleflex, which didn't take place until 2007. So I'm not really an expert in tractors, meaning I can't really say whether or not the Supreme Court was right when it comes to Graham's improvement on his invention. However, something that I think is rather interesting was the combination of the tractor case with the chemical case. So we mentioned in class that in Germany, there's actually a separate court system for patent cases, and that each industry has their own patent expert. And it's interesting to note that in the US, we don't have that. So a judge can decide on a case involving tractors, and the judge can decide on a case involving chemicals, and the judge might have a background in something like computer science. And the Supreme Court being all supreme, meaning there's only one of them, can decide on everything. But the judges that are in the Supreme Court come from various different backgrounds and may not know anything about tractors or chemicals for that matter. So I'm not really sure that it's fair to be able to combine these cases. Perhaps, in the end, the final decision wouldn't have been any different, and maybe it helps speed the Supreme Court through some of the other cases that it had to handle. But why is it that someone can decide that one ruling is good enough for both tractors and chemicals when the two industries are clearly very, very different? I think this is a fundamental flaw in our patent system, and unless it's changed, we'll continue having issues as long as the system exists. Thank you.